Okay, so hello everybody. Good morning from Bolivia. It's so exciting to be here. We've been long time partners and collaborators of World Vasectomy Day, and we are just so thankful to be part of this. My name, as Jonathan said, is Ana Cecilia Velasquez. I'm the country director of MSI Bolivia, and I'm here to present with Alison Hoover, who is an independent researcher, a study that we are so excited to discuss with you. Um, and we're doing this on behalf of several co-authors. I want to thank particularly Michelle Labrecque and Dominic Shattuck. I don't know if they're here today. It would be great if they're here. And also Samuel Lawton, Silvia Velasco, and Patricia Yedo Weber. This is a research study that is under review. So the findings are embargoed until publication and not for distribution. So please keep that in mind as we share some of the preliminary results of this study. So in terms of the context, in November 2021, MSI and World Vasectomy Day collaborated in a non-scalpel training strategy to improve access and affordability for the services in our clinics through our general practitioners. I just want to say that before that, we depended on urologists and we had to hire them out, and so services were more expensive and also less available in terms of time and all of that. So for this particular training strategy, we launched a free vasectomy campaign, which showed immediate success and truly overwhelmed our contact center. We got over 800 men contacted us within the first couple of weeks, and it was just so shocking that made us decide to run a demographic survey during the non-scalpel campaign period from November 1st to December 15. We were just extremely curious about what was generating this demand, when prior to that, really, we hadn't seen that. And also, we wanted to take under consideration that we were post-pandemic, right? Sorry, I'm getting some messages here about translations. Okay. Okay, so before we go into the preliminary results, I just want to share some of the impact that mainly that the training provided to MSI. So this graphic is really amazing. You can see in 2019 how the percentage of vasectomies, or the number of vasectomies, was really little compared to those of tubal ligations. And by the time we did the training, we started generating equity in terms of access to both men and women for permanent methods in 2023, where you can see that vasectomies are actually slightly higher than the number of vasectomies that we've done at MSI in 2023. Here in 2019, you could see that we were only doing around 77 vasectomies per year. And in 2021, it doubled the number of 2020, and it continued to exponentially grow after that. So how did we do this? Thanks to the first 4 providers that were trained, they became certified train of trainers. We have at MSI a very strict line of training where they have to be certified before they can train others. So we certify them so that they could continue to train other providers. So since 2021, we've been able to grow from 0 to 11 trained providers within the institution. And these are general practitioners. These are not urologists or specialists, but have become experts really at the vasectomy provision. Another really exciting thing that we were able to do after this successful training was to reach rural areas throughout our free services in our mobile units. Our mobile units travel all across the country, particularly to those places where there's not access to health. And we've been able to bring vasectomy services to these rural areas. And as I mentioned, we no longer depend on the external urologist to provide a service. So we've been able to, in our clinics, where we charge an amount, we were able to decrease decrease it by 50%. And I want to say that, of course, we continue to run free campaigns. This year, we ran 2 so far. So very exciting impact after the training. So now let's get into the objective of the study. The survey objective first was to identify the demographic characteristics of vasectomy demand in Bolivia. There's very, very little information about this in our country. To examine the associations between motivations and fears with age and parenting status, right? And finally, to describe the impact of the pandemic on the fertility desires. I also want to point out that this study received ERC approval and that there's a number there. So it's fully certified. Now I'm going to pass it to Alison, who's going to tell us a little bit about the methodology. Alison?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever this finds you. It's really great to be here with you. And as has been mentioned, to get to celebrate some of the results of this really important study. We've really taken our time with producing the findings from this because we feel that they are quite groundbreaking and exciting, and that understanding its context within the wider understanding and also within mute. Thanks. Yeah, in terms of understanding the context of these findings, we are really excited to share some of these very unique findings that we also think are replicating around the world. So we really look forward to, at the end of the session, hearing from others on the chat if they are seeing similar demographic trends in their vasectomy demand. So to the methodology of our study. The first is it was a cross-sectional study. We used for our data collection tool, we adapted a survey of close-ended questions from a survey that Population Council Mexico developed for World Vasectomy Day in 2017. It was a single online survey with 20 close-ended questions. We used Google Forms. It was among no scalpel vasectomy clients in Bolivia above the age of 18 who chose to participate in the free vasectomy campaign. And to be clear, the campaign was only open to people above 18. So this is specifying our study population, but we did not exclude anyone under 18. We did use an informed consent protocol as reviewed by our ethics review committee. And also we deployed the survey. It's not listed on the screen, but just to mention the way we did it is we did consent prior to their procedure, and then post-procedure when they were recovering in a recuperation room and having some tea and snacks, we would provide them a QR code to the Google Forms survey if they had indicated their consent to participate. We de-identified the data set, and ultimately we had 262 observations for our data. Some really unique demographics that stood out to us in this sample of 262 is this is a breakdown of age. We did see, a fairly standard, I think we had 48% were between 30 and 39, which I think is fairly standard, but really want to draw your attention to the trending younger age that we saw in this demographic, where we had 42% were 29 or under, which is pretty remarkable. That is distinct from a lot of what we see as a global norm in terms of age demand. So that really drew our attention, as did the number of biological children in the sample. I am very intentionally using the word biological children, which is something we will refer to later in some of our findings. But we did see a pretty high percentage also came with no biological children, which really stood out to us immediately as part of the research team and invited a lot of questions and further investigation about the drivers and what we could learn about this sample. Other key demographics, I'll just go through this slide quickly. The other thing we really wanted to just flag is the number of single individuals that also came and self-reported as single was about 35.5%. So really just a pretty notable population of young, single, and or childless men, which we think has really been getting a lot of attention and important questions recently. And so we're excited to share some of the implications and what we see about this changing trend in vasectomy demand. So while I came down to La Paz for the first week of the campaign in 2021, and I conducted some informal conversations with the men while they were in their recovery room as part of understanding how we can contextualize these trends and these pretty considerable changes in the demographic trends. So I want to highlight three primary themes that arose from those conversations and the implications from each. First, as I mentioned earlier, is the question of non-biological fatherhood. We construct a lot of our questionnaires, both as researchers and as providers, inquiring about whether or not they have biologically fathered a child. But a lot of the men that I spoke with were in a different parenting arrangement, whether that consisted of a blended family, maybe they were with a partner who had children from a previous partnership, and they felt that they were already serving in a fathering role, such that was at their capacity to father. We also saw some non-typical family structures. I spoke to one 24-year-old man who has ailing parents who had a child a bit later after him. And he has essentially stepped into a fathering role for this younger sister and really spoke with many of the same words that we hear about why people get vasectomies in their 30s as well, about, this is the number of children that I can care for. This is the number that I want. And he would happen to be expressing it at a younger age and without biological children, but really with many of the same reasons that we are accustomed to for people seeking vasectomy. So this really stood out to us as this need to consider that fatherhood may not be fully captured in the ways that we're currently soliciting it and documenting it, and to further understand the importance of non-biological fatherhood in decision-making about vasectomy demand. Second is, it's also really important to highlight and remind the context of November 2021 was still very much in a pandemic era. I think every country experienced its different waves of oscillations, of lockdowns, of rescinding lockdowns, of the different economic impacts of those lockdowns and the repercussions that followed it. But we really did hear in these interviews pretty grave concern about the state of the world, economic crises in the pandemic, some mentions of it feeling irresponsible to have biological children. I think I talked with one 23-year-old who felt that the economy was not offering opportunities in the informal sector in which he and his family worked to really provide stable housing and income and education for children. And it was quite memorable for me. We talk a lot about having children and that there's not necessarily a same societal emphasis on raising children well. And he had thought about it for 3 years before making the decision and really felt that he questioned his ability to raise children well in the context. And I think that this is a really growing consideration for people seeking contraceptive in general, but also in sterilization. And it's an important question from a reproductive justice lens of what the impacts are of economic crises and social instability in terms of understanding reproductive autonomy and fertility preferences. It was less common, but we did hear from several participants concerns about the environment and its role in influencing their decision to get a vasectomy. The environment was often described as a factor. It was not usually the main decision factor among those that mentioned it. But I think it's important to note that it arose organically in conversations. It is something that people are considering in terms of their own values and morals in caring for the environment and how that is continuing to play a prominent role in decision-making for vasectomy services. So I'll hand it back to Ana Cecilia to give us some of the key findings from this study.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah, so one of the key findings, first, we realized that there was a high unmet demand for affordable vasectomy services in Bolivia, no? And we at MSI have continued to see this throughout the years after the survey or the study in 2021. Then training providers was an effective way to increase access to vasectomy. I think that since then, actually, World Vasectomy Day has also been able to train other providers from other organizations, and now vasectomy services are way more available than they were before. And this obviously means that we improve access and advance gender equity in family planning utilization. And another key finding was the notable proportion of single and/or childless men under 30 years old. We at MSI are continue to evaluate this as the years go by, and the average age, which was 31 for this study, has not changed much from what we can see. So the trend continues. And as we just mentioned, the dominant motivations for seeking vasectomy without biological children are non-biological fatherhood, social and economic context, and environmental considerations. Alison? Alison now will share our key implications with us.
Alison, we can't hear you. Can you try again, please?
There we go. Thank you. It said I couldn't unmute myself. Okay, yes. So the key implications. So first of all, I want to underscore, I know we have in other ways in this presentation, the enormous value that resulted from MSI's really comprehensive efforts to make services more affordable. So the training was really effective in making it more accessible for people who wanted the services, that had this fantastic trickle-down effect of having improved gender equity and service provision. I mean, we saw effect after effect come forward from these efforts to reduce price and want to just really emphasize the importance of ensuring and improving affordability of vasectomy services for those who want it. The second implication we want to highlight is the need to really closely examine contraceptive demand demographics post-COVID-19. You know, I think the debates of whether we are truly post is an important question, but certainly in the wake, I think we are continuing to see a lot of implications and shifts in how healthcare is provided, some in good ways. We can look at the availability of telehealth as a major impact, but there are also clear impacts from the pandemic among fertility preferences. And this matches existing literature that identifies that in periods of significant social or economic upheaval, that fertility preferences change. We don't have a lot of evidence for really global lasting shocks like COVID-19. And so I think there is a really important need for policymakers and researchers to do a deeper dive into what contraceptive demand looks like as we transition into a more normal state of the post-pandemic. As mentioned, a real note for providers and researchers is this need to evolve our considerations around the unique and currently uncaptured status of non-biological fatherhood. We see a lot of modern understandings of the family that have branched from the standard heteronormative nuclear family structures. And it's an invitation, I think, to broaden our understanding of our criteria for vasectomy candidacy and to really nuance this investigation of if somebody comes in reporting no children, to look for opportunities to dig a little bit deeper and understand if maybe they do still identify themselves in a fathering role and maybe do still identify with many of the criteria that we use in candidacy evaluations. But finally, it's really notable, the sample and the proportion of young single childless men, and whether that is indicative of evolved masculinity, global instability, or simply an empowered sense to act upon their own desires for contraception. It is still a really considerable proportion, and it does really merit further investigation. I do want to note that we have seen several trends that really match this elsewhere. Colombia has documented similar trends, younger in age, single and childless. We've seen it in the US, and it's also been seen in Mexico, and that's just some of the documentation we've heard of so far. We are fairly confident this is not an isolated incident, and it really invites further interrogation globally about these trends and demographic demand. So if you are interested in launching a study like this, we would be happy to share our experience and work with you on capturing the demographic trends within your own institution or country. So it also, I think, really invites this question about the novel male contraceptives that are currently under development, and particularly those that are non-permanent, and looking into whether or not that would be a good opportunity for some of these young childless and or single men seeking vasectomy, and help to really ease a pathway for some of those contraceptive technologies to enter the market, and understanding the demand for that and its implications for counseling and vasectomy service provision. So those are our key implications. And final slide is just our contact information. If this is something of interest, and you do want to discuss further, or perhaps compare some of what you may be seeing in your own context, we would be happy to discuss our experience and engage a bit further in these conversations. So I'm also happy to take some questions. Thank you so much for having us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to find out if there's any ethical issues that come with performing vasectomies on younger subjects, like the way they had in Bolivia, where they had people who were 23 years old who are not fathers, biological fathers yet. Is there anything ethical, especially on the side of the medical personnel, to performing a vasectomy in younger subjects? Thank you.
I think, did you hear that question, Alison, Ana Cecilia?
I did.
Yeah, Alison, if you want, I'll just explain the context in Bolivia. Thank you for your question. In Bolivia, by law, you can access a permanent method when you are officially an adult, and that's 18 years of age in Bolivia. So, you are not going against any law in Bolivia, so you would need to look at what is the legal age that you are allowed to do a procedure like that in your own country.
Yeah, and I will just add some of the important considerations. I do really appreciate that question, and I think it is something that we are often asking ourselves in this position where we are seeing more and more younger and potentially also childless men come through. But I think there is, I want to acknowledge in particular that there is a global history of forced sterilization in several contexts. It really does demand more intense ethical scrutiny than we do in other contraceptive procedures. I appreciate many of the systems that are put in place with consent for procedures, informed consent, voluntary consent, and really ensuring that everyone making a contraceptive decision for themselves has the information they need to move forward. That being said, I think we also have to be aware of when we are actually infringing upon the autonomy of our patients by not providing the procedures that they may have chosen for themselves in a fully informed capacity. We do not exhibit the same scrutiny if a 23-year-old decides to become a father that we do if a 23-year-old decides not to become a father. And I think that is a result of some of our own social cultural norms, and it's understandable, and it is still a good question. But I think we have to be mindful about whether or not we are supporting ethics or perhaps infringing upon ethics when we withhold procedures from someone who has made an informed decision about their own contraceptive demand. And all of that needs to be taking into account local laws, really evaluating if that consent is informed and if they're really certain. And there's a lot of nuance to consider in there. But I want to invite that duality consideration of whether we are supporting ethics more by providing the procedure or by denying it. Thanks.
I was curious if we have Doug Stein. I know he practices in Florida. The original film that we made was about him and his practice, but I was curious about how you manage, how Doug manages the decision in terms of if there's any age at which he doesn't feel comfortable doing a vasectomy, because I know that it's coming up more and more often.
Yeah, I feel that my responsibility as a doctor is to share my experience. If I'm taking care of people with diabetes, I developed this broad spectrum of knowledge about diabetes, and I want to share that with my diabetic patient. A reproductive health person, I want to share that, and I've learned quite a bit doing vasectomy reversals. And I've done about 2,000, and behind every one of them is the story of a guy who at one time was absolutely convinced that he would never want any more children, and lo and behold, he's coming back 5, 10, 15 years later for a vasectomy reversal. That I share with anyone who is showing an interest in vasectomy. For example, if we get a registration on a guy who is 22 years old, we don't require a preliminary visit. But if I see a guy's 22, I give him a call. And it's rare that he and I are on the phone for less than 30 minutes. I want him to know that this should be considered permanent because vasectomy reversal attempts are not always successful. And you know, the responses I get can be varied. Like, whoa, doc, I've already paid for 2 abortions. Come on. Or, you know, I got a friend who got his girlfriend pregnant, and now he's making child support payments for the next 18 years. And I don't want to go through that, doc. You know, I drink a little bit every now and then. I get a little rowdy every now and then. I'm not always sure I've covered up properly. So when you look at it from the point of view of the young man, you can kind of understand why he would like to take control. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as I share my experience, and I very strongly encourage young men to, number one, chat with their parents about it, because I would know that if my 23-year-old son came up to me and said, hey, Dad, guess what? I just had a vasectomy. I mean, you did what? And it's not that I would have thought that he made a bad decision. It's just that I would have felt kind of hurt that he didn't share it with me and give me a chance to voice my opinion. And the last thing I do is that segues into, have you considered sperm storage? Why not? You know, you don't buy life insurance because you plan to die. You don't store sperm because you plan to use it. You do it because of that in the background. It sure makes your mother feel better. Young Robert got a vasectomy, but he has stored sperm. So, you know, from a mom's point of view, knowing that your son had a vasectomy is a lot easier to manage than if he has stored sperm or not. So those are the things I share with guys. And if they decide they want to continue with a vasectomy, I'm not going to stand in their way for them to do it. At least I've done my job. And some of the guys will take that to heart. They will discuss it with their parents, sometimes change their minds. They don't have to. They're 23. They're adults themselves. But I sort of tell them, you know, I sort of talk to them like I'm their parent. And I think that helps.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ana Cecilia.